Hello, I'm Lee Butler, the president of the Iliff School of Theology, and I am here in conversation with the Reverend Dr. Lee Boyung, who is professor of practical theology here at Iliff. And I am delighted that you've taken this time to have this conversation that we may educate and really just educate our community, particularly our Iliff community, about what it means to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So thank you for this time and for this conversation. So let me begin with some real basics. Mm-hmm. We know that May is AAPI Heritage Month. And it is a month, but it didn't begin as a month. It began as a one-week celebration. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and thought, that's just like Black History Month. Mm-hmm. It began as 1 week and then was expanded. So can you say anything about how it was established as 1 week and then why it moved to become a 1 month celebration?
I don't know exactly why this happened the way it happened, as you said, with Black History Month. As America became such a multicultural society, I think the initial approach was a celebration of a multiculturality of this country. But we are also learning now that this multiculturalism is still based on white-centeredness, that as if the white normative culture is the norm, and then this celebration of different cultures is something that celebrate. And there are a lot to celebrate, but we also need to question, celebrate for what purpose?
Yes.
As if we are serious about celebrating different makeup of this country that contributing to the richness of this country's culture.
Yes. I often make a joke about February being Black History Month or African American History and Heritage Month. I'm not the only one that makes the joke, but we make the joke saying we have a people that comes from a hot climate, but we are located to celebrate in the coldest month of the year. Now, there are reasons that February was selected for Black History as a month. Can you say something about how May came to be selected for Asian American, for Pacific Asian Islanders?
So I don't know exactly, but I think longest immigration history in this country is usually Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans, and in month of May, if you look around, a lot of Asian American churches have festivals and a bazaar that is related to their cultural heritage in their home country, like in April or cherry blossom festivals. And May, it's just like a spring month that a lot more food and celebrations and honoring ancestors and also coming from agricultural backgrounds. That's also, you start the new, rice farming that you put a baby rice plant to grow in month of May. So after that work, it's a waiting and also celebrations. So I think it is really related to our motherland's cycle of celebrations.
Okay. You just named different cultures, different ethnic groups that get all consumed by this term Asian or Asia. So while you may come from an area that we identify as Asia, you're more than just this unknown massive Asia. So say something about your culture as a Korean.
So that's another, very big question. And as you mentioned, Asia is such a vast continent with majority of the world population living there, over almost 4.5 billion people living there, and 2,300 different languages are spoken there. And so it is so not easy to pinpoint what Asian culture is. And so is Korean culture, right? Even though we Koreans have been talking about we are monoracial people, but that's also in a myth, as we have been invaded by China's different dynasties that have different ethnic groups, and have been wars with Japan and trades through Silk Road from Korea dynasty and even before. And the name Korea is coming from Korea dynasty that existed until 14th century in Korean Peninsula. So a lot of trades, and even before that, where I grew up, the region in South Korea, southeastern part, that is an area called the Silla dynasty that existed until 9th century. They had a very active trades with the countries outside of Asia too. So, but Korea has been saying that we are monoracial people, and that is something that the new scholarship is also challenging, because that does not help the current Korea that has so many people from Southeast Asian countries as through marriage and through the blue collar work, as Korean society is a shortage of blue collar labor work, all immigration, all that. So, but I guess one thing that I can say about Korean culture is such emphasis on community over individual, that to the extent that if I have to introduce my late husband to you in Korean, I have to say, this is our husband. Even though we, in grammatically it is the right thing to say this is my or my husband, mine, but saying my or I language in communication in Korean is extremely awkward. So we have to say this is our husband, even though I have no intention to share my husband with anybody else. Or this is our mother, this is our church. So even the ego boundaries are overlapping in such a communal culture. And so that we tend to see the world through communal eyes, and we tend to put the emphasis on community over individual, and therefore sometimes it becomes also a problem in any culture that overemphasize on one thing over the other can create certain schisms and discriminations. So, but I would say that the Korean culture has been very communal culture, and to the extent that it's also very Neo-Confucian based communal culture. So Chinese people who lost a lot of this Confucian communal cultural practices during cultural revolutions joke with the Koreans that we are more Confucian than Confucius himself.
Okay. I want to ask another historical question that I think is related to this last question about Asian, because America has this old understanding of melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
And so then Asians become a part of how folks get melted, even that whole concept.
Yeah.
And I was reading in some archives, and during the immigration periods, it didn't matter what country folks came from. They were usually identified as coming from the Flower Kingdom.
Mm.
And I just sometimes wonder how, if we actually went back and counted, would we see a larger number of Koreans, let's say, that actually immigrated to America than what we've thought by looking at some of the records?
So Koreans couldn't come to this country that freely because of that Immigration Act until mid-1960s. The USA had this prohibition of most Asians, or including Koreans, from moving to this country that all started in 19th century. First, the Page Act, that when this country, after the official ending of slavery, that they needed cheap laborers to replace free laborers provided by our enslaved black neighbors and people. So that also is in connection with the British Empire's the ending of their own slavery much earlier than U.S. Ending of slavery, because after the ending of slavery in British Empire, they brought quote-unquote coolies, guest workers from their colonies. There are Filipino and Indians and Filipinos and others from Asia. And then when U.S. ended official, the slavery, they still had to bring cheap laborers, and so already Chinese and Indian, Filipino coolies were already here, but more immigrants as railroad workers came from China. And so there is some myth about these women who want to be reunited with their men in this country, but there was a myth created that somehow Chinese women are disease carriers, so they are all sex workers. So there is a law enacted by U.S. Congress, Page Act, that prohibiting Chinese women from moving to here to be reunited with their husband. And then soon after that, another Exclusion Act, Immigration Act, was legalized, legally prohibiting Chinese people from coming here, even though in terms of numbers it's much smaller than European immigrants. But these Chinese and Asians or not Christians were not desirable immigrants that the U.S. society wanted to live. So with those histories, until mid-1960s, when immigration ban was lifted, not many Asians could move here. So this best of Korean immigration started happening since mid-60s and mostly 70s and 80s. And in case of Korea, because since 1991 military coup, we are under a military dictator governments until 1988. And even though with the first with the People's Movement, and in '87, we've elected the first people's elected government, but the president was still coming from military that was part of a 1980 massacre. Anyways, so because of those political situations, the elites who could not agree with Korea's military governments started coming here, and also it was by their family invitations here. So I think the main Korean immigration started in 1980s, 70s, but one of the earlier Korean immigrants, not many people in the U.S. society know that at the end of the 19th century, Korean young men came to Hawaii as plantation workers. And American Protestant missionaries came to Korea in the end of the 19th century, like 1884, 1885. And they evangelized Korea with a message that the American civic religion is equal to Christian message. So they preached like America is God's most beloved country and kingdom, and becoming Christian is like being an American. So those missionaries, this is very surprising thing to even most Korean Christians, that missionaries were recruited by plantations to be middlemen to recruit the workers from Korea. So about over 40% of Korean plantation workers, young men, came to Hawaii were Christians. Recent Christians evangelized by these missionaries, and they recruited by missionaries to work at the plantations. So the Korean immigration started at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of 20th century, when Korea's political situation was not stable, either because we were about to be invaded by occupied by Japanese colonial governments.
Wow. You've said quite a bit that is painful.
It is painful.
It's a history that is hidden, and exclusions and the stereotypes and the degradation, the dehumanization, and now we come to this moment of saying, let's celebrate.
Asian people are the only, quote unquote, I put Asian people are the only group of people who were legally banned from coming here with those Page Act and Immigration Exclusion Act, Chinese Immigration Exclusion Act at the end of the 19th century. Yeah.
So, I mean, that sounds like most Koreans, perhaps, maybe even Chinese and Japanese, would not even really be interested in this Heritage Month.
If we are conscious, if we are paying attention to actual history seriously,
yes,
really, but as you know that not every people of color are racially conscious, because we are the products of our education, that our history is, especially Asian history, is not taught. Asian American history is not taught in our public schools. So that's why it's still in U.S. School curriculum is based on multiculturalism, that very diverse group of people that makes U.S. society look better, enriching, but there is default center group, and we are like a sort of accent groups. And so if your mindset, your worldview is a product of that approach, that Asian American Heritage Month will be something that we can celebrate. But sometimes we need to take advantage of this month being set aside as a way to educate the public about actual history and cultures.
Yes, that's a wonderful way to look at this and to take advantage of the moment, because it's been lifted up. So let's not do as we've always done with these different Heritage Months. Oh, it's Asian American Heritage Month. Let's go get some Chinese food. Let's avoid these
with the K-pop music.
With K-pop music, yes. So if we're taking this approach of this is an opportunity to become more knowledgeable, to reflect on a history that has been not open but very closed to another human being. So it's been more about dehumanization. Is there a book that you might recommend as a good starting point for, since our audience is a theological audience, a nice theological book that would be a good starting point to help folks to think more deeply and have more clarity?
Well, as you know, that I just published a co-edited volume titled Embodying Anti-Racist Christianity. The subtitle is Asian American Theological Resources for Just Racial Relations. Entire authors are Asian American feminist theological religious scholars. And it was intentional for the editors to bring the feminist voices to the discussion. There are some books, even outside of theological resources, written on Asian American from critical lens. But this book came about during COVID. We were all locked down, and many of us experienced the hate crimes toward us because Trump government started calling it Chinese virus, not COVID. So many unfortunate attacks happened, and the sky shooting hate crimes against Asian American people, even killing.
Yes.
And so with those experiences, all of a sudden Asian American male leaders became, especially big church pastors, became the spokesperson of Asian American struggles and experiences, and they were contacted by U.S. major media outlets, but those of us feminist scholars who did some critical race theory studies, that we truly believe that Asian American racism cannot be addressed without addressing anti-Black racism and white settler colonialism. And so, but often those spokesperson, quote unquote, only talk about Asian American experience without addressing that this Asian American racism racism we experience is in connection with the anti-Black racism that this country is being built, and also we are part of this settler colonialism. And in 2022 March, the Atlanta spa shooting happened that this white evangelical theologically trained young man who had a sex addiction issue decided to kill these workers, including a woman in her 70s working at massage spa in Atlanta.
Yes.
That he thought that they are the cause of his addiction, so he wanted to get rid of this his cause of addiction by killing them. And 8 people were killed, and 6 of them were Asian or majority Korean American women, working class, working hard. And so, having experienced that, we also realized even within Asian or Korean American communities, some of these spokesperson people were saying that in a way that the message we got is such death, those women who worked in those spa, or some people mistakenly associated with the sex workers work, is not deserving their grief. So some pastors refuse to be in vigils for them. So watching this, how could you not recognizing this, but you talk about racism against Asian Americans? So this book was written by these feminist scholars in theology and religious studies with such consciousness that we want to address the anti-Asian hate crimes and racism in connection to anti-Black racism, white settler colonialism, also through a very feminist lens.
Yes. I question whether many of our Iliffian community members know how important you are as a scholar. I do question that. So you are not just here, you've been international in your work, and you've done lots of mentoring of the next generation of scholars. Now there's a particular organization that you work with that has really focused on conversation, sisterhood, and mentoring.
Yeah. There are 2 organizations, or I guess 3. One more foremost organization is called the Pan-Atom Pacific Asian and North American Asian Women in Theology and Ministry, which was co-founded by first-generation Asian American feminist theologians such as Kwak Pui-lan, Rita Nakashima-Brock, Jung Hyun-kyung, and some others 40 years ago. They were PhD students in all systematic theologies in different theological schools. They were brought together by the late theologian Larry Russell, who taught at Yale Divinity School, and she saw this woman alone in different schools, Harvard and Union, Claremont. And so she helped them, these women, get together. And at the same time, in the West Coast, at Pacific School of Religion, where I used to be, the organization called the PACT, that made of both male and female scholars of Asian heritage to talk about their struggles. So these 2 groups started a meeting together with these different motivations. And once they got together, they decided to continue to meet for mutual peer mentoring. So rather than competing with one another for jobs and whatever, they decided to grow together and not only survive but thrive together by supporting one another, networking one another. That organization was founded 40 years ago, and next year we are celebrating 40th conference, and I am the current president of that organization. So that I am a product of that mentors, just the life-giving mentoring work, because I did my PhD at a very prestigious East Coast institution, of course over 100 years old, and even when I studied at that school was over 100 years old, but I was the first Asian or Asian American in my PhD program, alone. And I was not a Catholic in this Catholic institution.
Yes.
So without supporting of this organization, I don't know where I would be still here. And the second organization is ATI, Asian Theological Institute, Asian Theological. So part of this ATI, we have an Asian Theological Summer Institute. So again, people like Kwak Puilan, Benny Liu, Peter Fan, and Joe, and myself, and Nami Kim, every year we, through a screening process, application process, we bring about 20 PhD students who are working on their dissertation proposal. They're all Asian heritage to this one location in Philadelphia for entire week to mentor them, because knowing they are mostly working in their own institution without Asian American faculty who can mentor them. So that's another organization that I'm giving a lot of energy and life, and I will be there next week. And then third organization is I'm a graduate of a United Methodist Women of Color Scholars Program. So in that organization also, not only as a woman of color, but also the importance of solidarity among women of color scholars. So that program was studied a long time ago, about 25 years ago, because they noticed that in none of the 13 United Methodist theological schools, there is no Asian American or woman of color tenured faculty and all that. So their goal was providing women of color leadership in the United Methodist schools.
So you've really had quite the career, and it is wonderful to hear how you're giving back, because you have been supported so well, and recognizing the need to continue to pass that along and bring up the next generation. As a final comment, what would you say is the most important thing for Iliff to know and to do as we're looking to the future?
Not only Iliff, but in this society, the general framework or approach to racial justice work is very black and white. That is with the right reason, because of this country's history against, at the cost of black people. And as I said earlier, the anti-black racism should be recognized, should be centered at any racial justice work. But at the same time, one group alone cannot achieve racial justice unless it is at the cost of somebody else's, as my dear colleague and friend Nami Kim's article titled, "My/Our Comfort Not at the Cost of Somebody Else's." So how do we create even more powerful justice work through solidarity needs different framework, that rather than us talking to this default center, how do we deconstruct this default center, that we create more intercultural engagement to do different ways of engaging racial justice. So I'm grateful that your leadership, and because I know having known about you for a while, that I know your framework of approach, And we now very much committed to owning our own colonial history with the Native Americans. But in addition to that, how Iliff can be a framework or platform to create this solidarity-based racial justice work, rather than we can, otherwise we can be ghettoized or competing with each other. So that I'm very interested and committed to be part of. And then Iliff's current, like the 15-5 work, some of the foundation approaches, cultural humility, that really challenges a cultural competency framework, which is very, in many ways, racist concept. That even though, sadly, that is framework of a lot of this multiculturalism, racial justice work. So this notion of a cultural humility, coined by two leading African American scholars in medical fields in the West Coast, San Francisco, Oakland area, as they medical workers and doctors and nurses work with patients from many different cultural backgrounds. They realize they can never be competent in anybody's culture, but this is a lifelong process to understand someone else's culture that requires a certain level of humility from our end to learn about them and honor them and continue to learn. So I think this, I know in the medical field it's a very widely embraced concept, but not in other fields. So then how can we expand that notion that we studied to bring solidarity work and to bring racial justice for all people? That requires all of us to do some basic homework.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time in this conversation. And so to everyone who has listened, we hope that you have learned and that Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month is our opportunity to learn what we did not know and to live into relationships differently. Thank you.